Do you know some people have learned to put their money in jars, but they put their money in the investment jar and they don't know why it doesn't multiply. It's in the investment jar, but it just sits there and it doesn't multiply. What is it that actually releases supernatural multiplication to finances in your investment jar? That's what we're going to talk about on the broadcast today. Don't go away.
Across the sands of time, God's people have walked His ancient paths. Join us as we explore divine identity and purpose. Unearth God's Word on wealth. Discover the blessing passed between family generations. And find life filled with empowering relationships. You will soar like never before. Welcome to Ancient Paths with Craig Hill.
In our last broadcast, we were talking about how critical it is to have relationship with God. Do you know, I believe that everything pertaining to finances is actually designed to lead us into relationship with God. When people have a shortage of money, that's designed to lead you to seek God. When people have an abundance of money, that's designed to lead you to seek God. God is interested in relationship. And Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21, "Where your treasure is, there shall your heart be also." And I believe that a lot of people carry a lot of treasure in their money, which is why Jesus talked many, many times about money. Do you know an amazing statistic? In the New Testament, there are 215 verses on faith, 218 verses on salvation, and 2,084 verses on money and finance. Do you know that 16 of Jesus' 38 parables were about money and finance? Why? Because Jesus was a money grubber? Of course not. Because Jesus wants not just your money, He wants your heart. He wants your whole life. And as He said, where your treasure is, there shall your heart be also. And Jesus found that when people's money is given over and subject to the Lord, then people's whole heart is given to the Lord. And so money is, and personal financial management, I believe, is about relationship with God, designed to bring you into relationship. So on the last broadcast, which was not broadcast on television, only on the internet, on craighill.org, we talked about how critical relationship with God is. We also talked about a little vision God gave me about 3 rivers, and that third river of abundance, how you can move on to that third river. If you didn't get an opportunity to see that broadcast, I encourage you to go to the internet right after you see this broadcast, and you can watch it on www.craighill.org. What I want to talk about today is supernatural multiplication. Do you know God did not design us to be natural beings? God designed us to be supernatural beings. We're created in His image. God designed us to naturally expect supernatural things to happen on a regular basis, to expect miracles in our lives, to expect supernatural things to happen. And I shared on a few broadcasts ago about how the Lord led Jan and me to just take a stand to begin to eliminate the debt that we had on our house. Again, we had never had credit card debt, but we'd always had a mortgage on our house, and we got serious about opting out of the devil's demonic capture program or slavery program through debt in about year 2000. And do you know, by early 2003, we made our last mortgage payment. We've never had a mortgage on a house since that time. And the way that God did that was when we got a revelation of jars. And instead of putting all our money in one jar, we put the money in 5 different jars. We put some money in our investment jar, and the Lord led us then across an investment. And it wasn't something supernatural initially. It was actually a piece of third-class junk mail that came across my desk. And normally Jan throws those things away, but for some reason she just felt to keep that one and let me see it. And when I saw that particular piece of junk mail, there was something the Spirit of God quickened to me. I looked at it and I said, I think I'm supposed to be involved in this. I need to learn about this. And so I began to learn about that particular area. We took some of the money from our investment jar and began to learn how to invest in this particular area. Do you know that God supernaturally multiplied that money, and that's what resulted in our being able to pay off our house in only 3 years. Now, had I had no money in the investment jar, I would have never been able to invest anything. I would have never been able to learn how that happens and been learned how to. I would never have been able to learn how to invest money, either naturally or supernaturally. Now, I want to show you several scriptural examples of supernatural multiplication. And the reason that that I believe the investment where we put our money was supernatural is because the timing was absolutely unique. Do you know that God led us to be positioned in the right place just at the right time for some events that occurred that never had happened before in past history and actually have never happened since that time? We just happened to have invested in a particular vehicle at exactly the right time, in exactly the right place, where it supernaturally multiplied, and that resulted in our being able to pay off our house. Now, since that time, that has happened several more times as God has led us to be in just the right place at the right time, just hearing from the Spirit of God in relationship. Let me show you a couple of scriptural examples. What's very interesting is many people never put any money in their investment jar. So if your investment jar looks like this, there's nothing in it, guess what? God could come, and I'm going to find something to put in my investment jar here. God could come and He could apply a supernatural multiplication factor to your investment jar. But what if there's zero in this jar? Then the problem is, what if God wanted to multiply whatever you're making available to Him 100 times? What's 100 times zero? Zero. What if God came along with a 1,000 times multiplication factor? What's 1,000 times zero? It's still zero. Do you see, it doesn't matter how much God would want to multiply. If there's nothing in your investment jar, there's nothing to multiply. If I take something and I put it in my investment jar, now God could multiply that. What if He multiplied that 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times? See, even 1,000 times 1 is a large number. So the point I'm making is, if we don't use jars and have nothing in our investment jar, then even if God comes and supernaturally wants to multiply, there's nothing there to multiply. Let me show you a scriptural example here in 2 Kings chapter 4. This is amazing. This is the prophet Elijah. He meets a widow in the town of Zarephath. And actually, I'm going to show you that one later. This is a different widow, and let's read this. This is a widow who, again, claims that she has nothing. Chapter 4 of 2 Kings, verse 1. Now a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord, and the creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves." So here's a woman in a terrible situation. She's a single mom. Her husband has died, but before he died, he incurred an incredibly huge debt, left her with the debt to pay, and now the creditors have come, and they're literally going to enslave her 2 sons. They're going to take these sons to be slaves to pay the debt, and she's in need of a miracle. She comes to Elisha, the prophet, and she says, Elisha says to her, verse 2, "What shall I do for you?" And he asks her this interesting question. "Tell me, what do you have in your house?" God is coming to you today with that same question. What do you have in your house? What's in your investment jar? Here's the amazing thing. She answered the way that most people do. She said, "Your maidservant has nothing in the house." Nothing. Why would she say nothing? She wants a miracle, and yet she has nothing available to multiply. She goes on and says, "Except a jar of oil." Now, why does she say, "I have nothing except a jar of oil"? Because this jar of oil is so minuscule, so small. She's saying, that doesn't mean anything. Do you know what I've noticed the strategy of the enemy is? He always causes you to focus on what you don't have instead of what you do have. What does she have? 1 jar of oil. What doesn't she have? Nothing else. So the issue is not what don't you have. Do you know God can't multiply what you don't have? God can only multiply what you do have. She says, "I have nothing except this jar of oil." And verse 3, Elisha said, "Go borrow vessels at large for yourself from all your neighbors, even empty vessels, and do not get a few." In other words, get a whole lot of them. "And you shall go in and shut the door behind you and your sons, and pour out into all these vessels, and you shall set aside what is full." So she went from him. She shut the door behind her and her sons. They were bringing the vessels to her, and she poured. And when the vessels were full, she said to her son, "Bring me another vessel." He said to her, "There is not one vessel more." And the oil stopped. She came and told the man of God, and he said, "Go sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons can live on the rest." How did the miracle occur? When she did what the prophet said, she quit focusing on what she didn't have and what she couldn't do, and she began to focus on what she did have and what she could do. She did a very natural thing. What was the natural action? Go and get a lot of jars. But what good is that going to do? I've only got one little tiny jar of oil. Never mind that. Something supernatural is going to happen. Go and get a lot of jars. Then the prophet said, now you just take that one jar and you begin to pour the oil into the next jar and the next jar, and God will supernaturally multiply the oil. Do you know that's exactly what happened? God supernaturally multiplied the oil. Why? Because she put something in her investment jar. She had one jar of oil, and God used that to multiply. Here's the issue. I find that many people that are deep in debt, many people that are in trouble, when you ask them, what do you have? They say, nothing. I can't do anything. Let me show you another example here. Jesus had a similar experience with his disciples. Let's look in John. We're going to look in chapter 6, and let's start here in verse 4. This is where Jesus had a large crowd of people. It says, now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. Therefore Jesus, lifting up his eyes and seeing a large crowd that was coming to him, said to Philip, Where are we to buy bread so that these may eat? And this he was saying to test him, for he himself knew what he was intending to do. In other words, Jesus is sort of teasing the disciples. He's toying with them. He knows exactly what he's going to do. He's going to release something supernatural, multiply all this food, but they don't know that. And he's trying to get them to shift their focus from the natural to the supernatural. So he says to them, where can we buy bread so that they may eat? This he was saying to test him, for he himself knew what he was intending to do. And Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, for everyone to receive a little. Interesting thing, here's what's basically going on. Jesus says, you guys feed them. You guys take care. There's 5,000 men, probably 15,000 people all told with women and children there. Jesus said, you guys feed them. And the disciples are in consternation. They don't know what to do. How can we feed them? We don't have enough money. Even if we had enough money, there's not a town nearby. How could we get the food here? It's not possible. What are they focused on? What they don't have and what they can't do. So what does Jesus do? Refocuses them. He basically says, does anybody have anything? And do you know their initial answer is pretty much, no, nothing. Well, I can't multiply. Nothing. Does anybody have anything? And finally, one of them says, well, there's one little boy that has his own personal lunch. And, but I mean, what good's that going to do? A couple fish, few loaves of bread, that isn't going to feed 15,000 people. What are we going to do with that? And Jesus, I think, sort of chuckles and he says, well, bring that to me. Let's see what's going to happen, because he is moving in the supernatural. He has a supernatural expectation. He's not just expecting natural things, and he's trying to help his disciples move from the natural into the supernatural. That's what I'm wanting you to understand today, is you're not designed to live in the natural, but in the supernatural. And so what Jesus does is an incredible thing. He says, bring to me what you have. And they do. And so we look down here in verse 8. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there's a lad here who has 5 barley loaves, 2 fish. But what are these for so many people? And Jesus said, have the people sit down. Now there was much grass in that place. The men sat down and numbered about 5,000. And then something was released supernaturally. We're going to take a break right now, and right after the break, I want to come back and show you how this supernatural multiplication took place, and we're going to look at another example. But let's go to a break right now, and I want the announcer to share with you how you can get some materials that will help you learn how to move from the natural into the supernatural in your own life.
Have you seen decline or even devastation instead of abundance in your finances? Do you want to walk down the path where your financial life works like never before? Then you need the new package, God's Ancient Path to Wealth from Craig Hill. This offer includes Craig's book, 5 Wealth Secrets 96% of Us Don't Know, and his 8-part CD series titled God's Power to Get Wealth. Craig Hill's practical experience and biblical insight will guide you through God's master plan for handling finances, the power behind money, 5 biblical uses of money, the truth behind sowing and reaping, and much more. Order these indispensable financial roadmaps, God's Ancient Path to Wealth, today for a gift of just $45 or more. Call our product line now at 303-797-1139 or simply order online at craighill.org and get your financial future placed on God's Ancient Path to Wealth. Again, the number to call is 303-797-1139. And now, back to Craig.
So you can see God has designed you to be a supernatural being, not just a natural being. Obviously, we live in a natural world. Remember the scripture in John chapter 4, verse 23 and 24, God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth. So we want to understand supernatural faith principles, but we also want to understand natural truth principles so that we keep a balance in both sides. We don't violate truth principles and then expect God to do a miracle all the time because we refuse to obey gravity, or we refuse to obey natural principles, or we enslave ourselves through debt and constantly put ourselves in need of a miracle. But on the other hand, God is a God of supernatural things, and God will supernaturally extend mercy. God will supernaturally multiply, and we need to learn to live a lifestyle with an expectation of flowing into supernatural. So let's go back to what happened here with Jesus and the disciples in John chapter 6. They were focused on nothing. He finally said, bring what you do have. Quit focusing on what you don't have and what you can't do. Bring to me what you do have and do what you can do, which is bring to me the one little lunch that you have and the few fish, the few loaves of bread. Have all the people sit down, he said in verse 10. And it said, Jesus said, verse 10, have the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. Then Jesus took the loaves, and having given thanks, He distributed to those who were seated, likewise also of the fish, as much as they wanted. When did it multiply? Not in the baskets. It multiplied as they began to pass it out. So as they began to take action based on what Jesus said, it released a miracle, just like the story we saw before with the widow with Elisha. When was the miracle released? When she began to pour the oil. Do you know if she would have sat there looking at the oil in that jar and never poured any into another jar, no miracle would have taken place. They could have sat there and looked at that food all day long, waiting for the bread and the fish to multiply. No miracle would have taken place. When did it take place? When they acted on it. When they took the bread and the fish, they began to pass it out. That's what released the supernatural. That's what released the miracle. Do you know many people sit there and look at their investment jar, they put their money in it, they look in it, and they go, multiply, multiply, multiply. It isn't going to multiply in the jar. When's it going to multiply? When you take it out of the jar and you deposit it in some place where it can multiply. Now that's not only a natural investment on the earth, that can be a supernatural investment in heaven. What I mean by that, you could take this money and give it in an offering, sow it into a ministry, for example, and it will multiply. We have people write to us all the time about how they have done that. God gave them a certain amount of money. They have sown it into the ministry, even to multiply this television program, and it has multiplied. As people have done that through the years who have attended Ancient Path seminars, and they have given in offerings, they write letters back about how supernaturally exact multiples of the money they gave has increased, and God has done that supernaturally. So the point is, the money isn't going to multiply sitting in the jar. It has to be taken out of the jar. The jar is just to collect it. Then you take it out and sow it into something where it can multiply. And the same is true regarding the loaves and the fish. They did not multiply into baskets. They multiplied as they were passed out. The same with the oil. It didn't multiply sitting in the jar. It multiplied as the widow took it and began to pour it, and it didn't run out. That was the miracle. So it's when you take the money out of the investment jar and you begin to sow it somewhere so that it can multiply. Same in farming. The obvious example would be no seed multiplies sitting in a bushel basket. You've got to take the seed out of the basket, sow it into the ground. That's what causes the multiplication. So it's the releasing of the seed, the sowing of the seed that causes multiplication. And so that's what we see happen here. They passed out the loaves and the fish, and a supernatural miracle happened, and the food was multiplied. And verse 12, when they were all filled, all the people had eaten as much as they wanted, then Jesus said to his disciples, gather up the leftover fragments so that nothing will be lost. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. And therefore, when the people saw the sign which he had performed, they said, this is truly the prophet who has come into the world. In other words, people were amazed by the supernatural. I want to show you another example here. This is the one I was thinking that I was going to earlier in the broadcast. But this is Elisha and another widow that he encountered in 1 Kings chapter 17. And we'll start down here in verse 9. Now, this is also an interesting study. I encourage you to read the whole chapter, 1 Kings 17. What we see here with Elisha is the channel keeps changing. He's in a city and there's no food because there's a drought in the land. And the word of the Lord comes and says to Elijah, get up from here and go to the brook Cherith, which he does. Why? The channel is changing, but the source remains the same, God. After a while, the brook dries up where Elijah is. Do you know what most Christians would conclude? The brook is dried up. I'm going to die. There's no provision. But no, the very next verse, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. And the next thing we see is the Lord says, go to Zarephath. You'll encounter a widow there. And this widow will be a new channel of provision. And so in verse 8 of 1 Kings chapter 17, it immediately says, the word of the Lord came to him, arise and go to Zarephath. Now that's right after the brook dried up. So what we see is no provision. The provision stopped in verse 7. The brook dried up. What did Elijah conclude? Not God has abandoned me, God has left me. Oh, we're just changing channels. And immediately in verse 8, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, go to Zarephath, find a widow. Now again, a widow wouldn't normally be a great channel of provision because widows in those days had nothing. They couldn't work, they had no job, they had no channel of income themselves, and yet here we find an incredible thing. God says, I'm going to use a widow. So Elijah finds this widow, and we'll pick up the story here in verse 9. Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and stay there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to provide for you. So he arose and went to Zarephath. When he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. Oh, great. That's a good sign. A widow just gathering a few sticks. And he called to her and he said, please get me a little water in a jar that I may drink. And as she was going to get it, he called to her and said, please bring me a piece of bread in your hand. But she said, as the Lord your God lives, I have no bread, only a handful of flour in a bowl and a little oil in the jar. And behold, I'm gathering a few sticks that I may go in and prepare for me and my son that we may eat it and die. That's her vision. I've got one little bit of oil, one little bit of flour. I'm going to make my last meal and we're going to die. That's it. That's her vision. We have no provision. There's nothing. We're going to die. And Elijah does the strangest thing. You know what I would have thought? If I would have come into that town, and you'd probably be just like me, you encounter a widow that has nothing, what would you think? I'd be thinking, oh my goodness, we need to find some people and take up an offering and help this lady. Elijah doesn't take an offering to help the lady. He takes away from her her last meal. It's amazing. He says to her, I don't know if I could ever do that, but that's what the Spirit of God directs him to do by faith. And he says to her, verse 11, as she was going to get it, he called to her and he said, please bring me a piece of bread in your hand. But she said, as the Lord your God lives, I have no bread, only a handful of flour in the bowl and a little oil in the jar, and behold, I'm going to make this bread, and my son and I are going to eat it and die. Elijah said to her, don't fear. That's the first thing. She was full of fear. Don't fear. Go and do as you have said, but make me a little bread cake from it first. Can you imagine that? Make me the bread cake and bring it to me. Can you imagine modern day newspaper headlines? Prophet comes to town, takes last meal from widow. That's what happens to Elijah. He has to say this to her. Do as you have said, but make me a little bread cake from it first, and bring it out to me. Afterwards you may make one for yourself and for your son. For thus says the Lord God of Israel, the bowl of flour shall not be exhausted, nor shall the jar of oil be empty until the day that the Lord sends rain on the face of the earth. So she went and did according to the word of Elijah. And she and her household ate for many days, and the flour was not exhausted, nor did the jar of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke through Elijah. Again, she released a supernatural miracle. A miracle took place. Now, I want to share just a little bit more, another key about this story, but we're out of time today. So on the next broadcast, I want to share with you, how do you find people who know how to multiply, who can partner with you, and how was this miracle released in the life of this widow? And you'll be able to see that next broadcast, not on television, but on the internet. It's going to be broadcast on the web at www.craighill.org. Don't miss the next broadcast.
Again, be sure to get the Ancient Path to Wealth package, including Craig's book, 5 Wealth Secrets 96% of Us Don't Know, and his 8-part CD series, God's Power to Get Wealth. Both resources are yours for a gift of just $45 or more. Call our product line now at 303-797-1139 or simply order online at craighill.org.
If this broadcast has been a blessing to you, I want to invite you to become a regular partner with our ministry. You know, we are wanting to expand this message to many, many different networks, to take it all around the world so that more and more people can get an understanding of God's ancient paths. And we have regular monthly partners. We send out a CD of the month that lets you know an update to the status of what's going on in the ministry, what's new around the world and here in North America, a special teaching also just for our partners. And so I want to encourage you to partner with us financially and in prayer. You can become a partner today by calling the phone number on your screen or going to www.craighill.org and click Become a Partner. Thank you. God bless you.
Once again, go to craighill.org or call to receive the Ancient Path to Wealth package for your gift of just $45 or more. For those of you following Craig along this Ancient Path to Wealth series, the next broadcast is available for viewing online at craighill.org. So be sure to join us there. And thank you for watching today's episode of Ancient Paths with Craig Hill.